trouble, don't be frightened. Those that seek hope shall never go wanting. Nothing can trouble, don't be frightened. Though alone fails us. Nothing can trouble, nothing can frighten. Those that seek love shall never go wanting. Nothing can trouble, nothing can frighten. Love alone fills us.
There's a series of folk tales in the Sufi tradition of Islam that depict the life and antics of a character named Nasruddin. The stories are all very different, mostly short, and typically depict Nasruddin, depending on the story, as a combination of a wise man, a fool, or a trickster, all with the intent of shedding some light on the human experience. The story I want to tell today is a Nasruddin story, and it begins with him buying a farm on the outskirts of a city. On his first day going into town, he traveled with his donkey, who was carrying several large bundles of hay. To get to the marketplace, though, Nasruddin had to get through a gate. At the gate was a guard, whose job it was to stop and inspect anyone or anything going through. Because Nasruddin was new in town, the guard took special notice of him. As he tried to get through, the guard stopped him, looked at him very suspiciously, and said, "There is something shifty about you. I can just tell that you're up to no good. I bet you're trying to smuggle something into town." Nasruddin vehemently denied it, but the guard insisted on searching him. He patted Nasruddin down, he tore open the bundles of hay on the donkey's back, he opened the bag that Nasruddin was carrying, and even pried open the donkey's mouth to see inside. He couldn't find anything, but that just made him more suspicious. As he reluctantly opened the gate, he swore to Nasruddin that he would figure him out. "All this means," he said, "is that you are an especially clever smuggler." And the guard was true to his word. Every time, every day Nasruddin passed through that gate, he was searched. The pat-downs, the hay bundles, the bags, the donkey's mouth. Each time, the guard was forced to give up and forced to let Nasruddin through. This went on for years. Eventually, the guard retired and returned to civilian life. He stopped worrying about Nasruddin and the gate and the smuggling ring he was convinced was happening. One day, though, as he was walking through the marketplace leisurely, he saw a familiar place in the crowd. He shouted at Nasruddin who it was. "You, I know you, come over here and speak with me." He gestured at Nasruddin, who had just come through the gate, happy and unharassed. The old guard looked at his adversary. "Now admit it, you were smuggling something across the border all these years, weren't you?" Nasruddin grinned and nodded. The guard jumped in surprise, but also excited in being validated. "I knew it. All my friends thought I was crazy. Now what is it? What were you smuggling? I'm off the job now. I'm retired. I won't tell." Nasruddin, the smuggler, looked at him and smiled. "My old friend, this whole time, I've just been smuggling donkeys." We can try and guess the intended message of this story. Perhaps the original authors were making a critical evaluation of the dangers of over-policing in relation to border control. of how invasive law enforcement may not effectively deter criminality. That's probably not what they intended, even though it is relevant today. So I suspect that the original writers instead were making a point about how we human beings are prone to look past things that are right in front of us, of how we can get stuck in our assumptions and go on autopilot. What we expect to see becomes what we actually see, and we miss what else is out there and what is possible. Henry Ford suggested this phenomenon of how we have blinders and how it limits our imagination and our vision when he spoke about the invention of the automobile. He wrote, "If I had asked them what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses." Getting stuck in the blinders of our lives limits our abilities to imagine alternatives, to think creatively, to remove ourselves from the world we know to the world that is possible. It doesn't matter just for people like Henry Ford or for border guards, but for each of us. Taking our blinders away is a spiritual practice of opening our mind, of learning to see the world for what it really is. It's vast and full of mysteries, but it's also knowable and available to us in deep and intimate kinds of ways. We won't, of course, ever be truly free of the limitations of our minds. Our lives will always be framed by our perspectives and our lenses. There is truth to what they said in the old movie, The Truman Show. We accept the reality with which we are presented. And yet our spiritual lives, and I think our lives no matter what, depend on our trying to be as awake as we can. Buddhism as a religion, or even as a psychological practice removed from spirituality, is crystal clear about the purpose of Buddhist life. The title of the Buddha literally means the awakened one. The practice of meditation is not only just to calm us down and get rid of stress, but it helps us get rid of illusions, be present, and cultivate a sensitivity to all that's around us, within us, and then lets us find joy within it. We want to get rid of the blinders in our lives, not only because they harm our ability to see the world clearly. We do it because blinders suggest a false reality, that the world is small and finite, and that there is only so much to know and to understand. One obvious impact of blinders is that it breeds small-mindedness. People can't see past their own noses, and that leads to falsehoods that end up hurting a lot of people. But just as powerfully, if not more subtly, blinders work within us and keep us from living our own best and fulfilling lives. I remember one period of my own life when I was struggling. I had moved to a new city. I knew absolutely no one. The congregation I worked for was imploding upon itself, and it wasn't because of me. And I found myself wondering each day when I woke up why it was so hard for me to be happy. I was constantly thinking about what I needed to do to lift my spirits, and yet nothing seemed to work. I tried this and that, new things, I read about it, and it felt like there was nothing I could do. A therapist later called it situational depression, but what it felt like was grayness everywhere. And once I realized how gray everything was and how stuck I was, I felt even worse, because I realized just how trapped I actually felt, and how powerless I was, like there was no alternative that could save me. This hopelessness that sometimes we feel is a spiritual crisis, and it is often a harmful byproduct of blinders. It's not our fault, because when we're in that really dark place, we get stuck and we lose the ability to see or even imagine a different way, those new possibilities, those ways of finding joy. When I was in that dark place, it felt like I lost the ability to see past the darkness, that there was no other reality than where I was. It felt like nothing could surprise me, like I had grown tired of the world, and it had become dull, uninspiring, and no longer to move me. A few years after this, I was discussing that year of my life while going through one of the requirements to become a UU minister. You have to undergo an intensive 2-day psychological evaluation where you talk about your past, the personal issues that you might carry with you, explore your personality type, and then they write a 20-page report that gets sent to the denomination to evaluate your fitness for ministry. It is a frightening experience. You are asked to be both very vulnerable and share a lot about something that is very much you, while also being vulnerable to their judgment at the same time. And still, it can be very powerful and rewarding because you get to go deep into who you are, have yourself reflected back by trained professionals who try to understand people for a living. One of those conversations during that 2-day weekend stuck with me. We were talking about that time in that dark place when I was struggling and how I got through it. And I asked the examiner whether he saw any patterns for how people get through tough times like that. He thought for a few moments and then said, "In my experience, there is one quality that corresponds more than any else with resiliency, that getting through. It's curiosity." He went on to say that curious people who are interested in the world, who took joy in learning, they were able to immerse themselves in things beyond themselves. And thus they avoided the traps and walls of depression and despair when they closed in. And even beyond that, curious people seemed to live in a world that was far more open at all, because there was always something new and exciting and different for them to connect and discover. Curiosity, he suggested, leads to surprise, which leads to joy. It leads us to notice possibilities, which leads then to freedom and then to hope. Curiosity in this view becomes an antidote to a kind of cynicism, a cynicism spawned in dark times that suggests that we know enough of the world to judge it uninspiring and hopeless. Curiosity reminds us that there is always more than what we can see. It offers us an alternative to our blinders and reminds us that there is something beyond our senses, something out there that we might not know, might not understand, might not even be able to intuit. But it could be a reason for happiness and wholeness and resiliency. Most of us here want the kind of life of curiosity. We want the impacts of resilience and hope. But to get it, we have to find and make it a practice. We have to ask ourselves constantly, in big decisions and small, how am I making space for wonder and the unknown in my life? How am I cultivating curiosity so that my world doesn't feel small and limiting and so predictable that I'm not inspired by it anymore? And just as important, how are my blinders, my own illusions and struggles, holding me back? We have to learn to be sensitive to that little part of us that says, I want to learn more. The impulse that says, that's really interesting. Like exercising a muscle, it takes practice to recognize these budding moments of curiosity, to sense them, and then also have the courage and discipline to follow where they lead. Living this way is actually pretty countercultural because it means accepting and being okay, knowing that our limitations are actually our path to hope. They aren't liabilities. They offer us the opportunity to get out of our own minds and be witnesses to the universe's limitless wonders and surprises. No matter what we feel, no matter how hard life is, we can take comfort in knowing that there is so much out there, so much more that we cannot know or understand or sense. We will never, most of us, be pretty and fully awake. None of us are Buddhas. There will always be donkeys that we do not see, and that's okay. All we have to do is try to keep our eyes open. We never know what possibilities lie in wait, for what joy life has in store, and what wonders remain to be discovered. That is a great gift, and it is a great hope. May it be so for all of us.